What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? Hal Jennings asked himself this question as he sat behind the wheel of his 2001 Chevy Impala, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as the afternoon sun poured through the windshield, heating the dashboard until the dust glowed. He was waiting at the light on 3rd and Main, the busiest intersection in downtown Dayton, Ohio, where the roads narrowed and the world always seemed in a hurry to move past him. He squinted against the glare, the ache in his left hip a dull throb, and sighed as a sleek white Tesla Model Y glided effortlessly through the intersection, no driver in sight. The futuristic machine turned perfectly on its own, as if guided by some invisible force. People crossing the street barely noticed. But Hal did. He always noticed. Well, hell, he muttered, tightening his grip on the wheel, guess the future left me behind. The light turned green, and he pressed the accelerator a second too late, earning an angry honk from the young man behind him. He flinched, waved apologetically, and drove on. At 72, Hal felt less like a man and more like a leftover. His days blurred together, morning coffee, a slow walk to the mailbox, the familiar creak of his recliner, the occasional trip to the grocery store, a forgotten world tucked into the corner of a shrinking life. Ever since Carol died 5 years ago, time had stopped stretching forward. Instead, it curled inward, looping on regrets and what-ifs. That evening, he microwaved a frozen dinner and turned on the TV, flipping past the news, sitcom reruns, and reality shows he couldn't stand. He found himself on YouTube, one of the few platforms he could still navigate without too much frustration. A thumbnail caught his eye, Elon Musk on the future of AI and FSD, full interview. He clicked. There he was, that voice, calm, fast, relentless. Elon leaned forward, eyes flickering with ideas as he spoke. Most people die by the time they're 25, he said. We just don't bury them until they're 75. Hal sat up, spoon halfway to his mouth. He rewound and listened again. Most people die by 25. The words hit like a wrench dropped on concrete. He stared at the screen, Elon's voice echoing in his ears. The man spoke about risk, failure, building rockets with no guarantee, pushing through ridicule. Hal remembered that feeling. The feeling of chasing something bigger than yourself. It had been so long. Long before back pain and blood pressure meds, before Rachel stopped calling, before Carol's laugh disappeared from the kitchen. Hal had dreamed once. Not of space, but of cars, of building an autonomous system back in the 1980s, long before anyone had heard of Tesla or LiDAR. He'd filled notebooks, drawn schematics, soldered boards late into the night in the garage while Carol brought him coffee and asked questions like she believed in him. He never filed the patent. Never finished the prototype. Life had gotten in the way, work, bills, a baby, then layoffs and disappointment. The dream had gone into a box under the stairs, and Hal had told himself that maybe it had never really mattered. But watching Elon now, all these years later, something inside Hal stirred. A rusted gear shifted. A voice whispered, maybe it still does. He leaned forward and clicked subscribe. Then he scrolled to the comments, watching from Kansas. My dad would have loved this. Elon doesn't care how old you are, only that you're doing something that matters. This story might just spark a new beginning. Then a prompt popped up under the video, hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Hal stared at the blinking cursor in the comment box. He hadn't written anything online in years. Slowly, he typed, watching from Dayton, Ohio. I used to build things. Might try again. He didn't hit post. Not yet. Instead, he sat back, stared at the ceiling, and listened as Elon talked about how he ignored doubters, how he learned from failure, how he built even when no one believed. The next morning, Hal shuffled into the garage. Dust coated everything. Old tools. Rusted parts. A cracked clock on the wall, stuck at 2:17. He stood there in the silence and saw shadows of his younger self everywhere, blueprints pinned to walls, wires tangled across workbenches, Carol leaning on the doorframe, telling him, "You're gonna change something one day, how?" He whispered to no one, "Did I?" He opened the cabinet near the back, coughing as a cloud of dust exploded into the air. Inside was the box. He knew exactly where it was. He pulled it out slowly, fingers trembling. It was heavier than he remembered. Inside, old sketches, parts lists, an early microcontroller he'd soldered by hand, a Polaroid of Carol and baby Rachel in front of the garage. On the back, Carol had written in blue ink, "Keep building." Hal sat on the stool and stared at the blueprints for what felt like hours. He'd drawn these when Reagan was president. He smiled faintly at the messy handwriting, the smudges, the note that read, "Goal, full lane detection with infrared, under $300. He remembered how he used to believe that he could get there. That belief felt childish now, ridiculous even. But it also felt alive. For the first time in years, Hal felt alive. He closed the box gently, looked around, and said aloud to the empty space, "Let's see what's left in the tank." He spent the rest of the day cleaning the garage. He found an old transistor radio, tuned it to some classic rock station, and worked until his lower back screamed at him to stop. He ignored it. That night, he posted the comment. "Watching from Dayton, Ohio. I used to build things. Might try again." He hit post. The next morning, there were 5 replies. One said, "Go for it, man. Never too late." Another just read, "Wrench forever." Hal chuckled. It felt small. It also felt like something. He walked down the driveway and stared at the Impala. The check engine light had been on for a year. The paint was chipped. It was loyal, but outdated. Just like him. Across the street, a neighbor's son was being dropped off by a Tesla Model X. It rolled to a quiet stop, the passenger door popping open as if by magic. No driver. The boy grabbed his backpack and ran inside. Hal shook his head, then walked back to the garage. He stood in the doorway, looked at the blueprints now laid out on the workbench, and whispered, "All right, Elon. Let's see if this old man can catch up." The mornings used to start with laughter. Carol would hum something off-key in the kitchen, the smell of bacon drifting through the house while sunlight danced through the yellow curtains she sewed herself. Rachel, all pigtails and energy, would race down the hallway in mismatched socks, crashing into the kitchen table with the uncoordinated enthusiasm of an 8-year-old. Hal remembered sitting at that same table, holding a mug of black coffee, a pencil behind his ear, and a napkin full of calculations next to his plate. Back then, everything felt possible. Back then, he was still somebody who built things. Now, the mornings were different. Silence filled the rooms. The yellow curtains were gone, replaced by blinds Rachel had installed when she visited 3 years ago. She said they were easier to clean. Maybe they were. The kitchen table was bare except for a stack of unopened mail, mostly medical bills and letters from insurance companies. The coffee maker wheezed and groaned before spitting out something that barely tasted like coffee. Hal sat at the same table, but now he stared out the window at the overgrown lawn, his fingers absently tracing a scratch in the wood. The silence wasn't just around him, it was inside him. A dull, endless quiet that had settled in the day Carol died. She'd gone quickly. A stroke in the night. No warning. No time to say goodbye. Just silence where there used to be a heartbeat. Hal had stood in the hospital room, staring at the machines that didn't beep anymore, holding her hand as it grew colder. He'd whispered her name like it could somehow pull her back. It didn't. And Rachel, she grieved differently. She threw herself into work, into her robotics lab in San Jose, into silence of her own. They'd grown apart even before Carol passed, but after, it was like a wall had dropped between them. Every conversation was strained. Polite. Surface level. How's your blood pressure? You still walking every day? You should come out here sometime, Dad. See the lab. But Hal never did. He told himself it was the flights. The hassle. The cost. The truth was, he didn't know how to talk to her anymore. Not since the fight. That last real conversation, they'd argued about the house, about the past, about how he'd let everything slip through his fingers. She'd accused him of giving up. He'd told her she didn't understand what it was like to lose your other half. And then she left. She'd call sometimes. Text, mostly. Birthday greetings. A Merry Christmas. But never the long conversations they used to have, when she was still a teenager asking how engines worked and begging him to let her solder wires in the garage. Hal had never been good with words. He knew nuts and bolts. He knew torque ratios. He didn't know how to say, "I'm sorry," in a way that didn't sound like surrender. He missed her, but he didn't know how to reach her. He'd never told her that he still had her science fair project in the garage. The one where they'd built a simple autonomous rover out of old vacuum parts and a PlayStation controller. She was 12. They'd stayed up till midnight getting the code to work. When the robot finally made it across the garage without crashing, she jumped into his arms and shouted, "We did it." She'd won second place at regionals. She cried all the way home because it wasn't first. But Hal had never been prouder. That was the last time she talked about wanting to build things with him. Not long after, she started focusing on school, on friends, on getting out of Dayton. He didn't blame her. She was brilliant. But every time she accomplished something, MIT, a job at a top robotics firm, speaking at conferences, Hal felt both proud and painfully aware of the distance growing between them. Carol used to say, "She's your daughter through and through. Stubborn as a mule, brilliant as hell, and impossible not to love." Hal believed that. Still did. He just didn't know how to tell her anymore. The garage was the only place that still felt familiar. It smelled like oil and metal and time. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the floor was stained with years of experiments, repairs, and unfinished dreams. The workbench was cluttered with old tools, pliers, soldering irons, multimeters long out of calibration. There was a radio covered in dust. He turned it on one day last winter, and it still worked. The music had been scratchy, but it filled the silence for a while. On the top shelf, hidden behind a box of old car manuals, was a dusty manila folder. Inside, blueprints. His blueprints. Pages of hand-drawn diagrams, notes, flowcharts. Hal had once tried to build his own self-driving system, before Tesla, before AI became a household word. He'd called it Guidelight. The name had come to him after a storm knocked out power, and he watched a firefly hover in the dark like it knew exactly where it was going. Even a little light can guide something, he'd told Carol. She liked that. He'd spent 5 years working on it. Nights in the garage, weekends studying early neural networks, trying to teach a machine how to see the road. It had promise. Enough that a small venture firm in Columbus agreed to take a meeting. But on the day of the pitch, Rachel came down with the flu. Carol couldn't take time off work. So Hal missed the meeting. Told himself there'd be another chance. But there wasn't. He went back to work at the factory. Years passed. He shelved the project. Carol said she understood. Rachel never mentioned it again. Still, Hal never threw it away. Some part of him believed that maybe, someday, he'd finish it. That someday never came. Until now. Watching that Tesla glide through the intersection yesterday, flawless, quiet, perfect, had opened something. A door he thought was sealed shut. And Elon's voice, "We just don't bury them until they're 75, it echoed like a challenge. Hal wasn't 75 yet. But close. He thought about that. Thought about how many years he'd spent just, existing. Retirement hadn't felt like freedom. It had felt like being phased out. Like he was a relic everyone was too polite to discard. He remembered the time he went to buy a phone and the young guy behind the counter kept talking to him like he was deaf or slow. He remembered the woman at the grocery store who called him, "sweetie," with that tone, the one that said, "You're not really here anymore, are you?" Hal had nodded and smiled. But inside, it burned. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't dead. He was just, paused. The truth was, he missed building. Missed problem solving. Missed the click of a socket wrench and the glow of a solder joint coming together just right. He missed that feeling of making something. Of creating something. So when he stood in the garage again that afternoon, holding the old guide light folder in his hands, something in his chest shifted. Not a sudden burst of inspiration. Not some dramatic epiphany. Just a quiet decision, why not see what's left? He pulled out a schematic labeled, "Lane Detection, Optical Sensors, Ver. 3.2, the handwriting was shaky. The paper had yellowed. But the design was solid. Simple. Clever, even. He remembered how excited he'd been when it worked in simulation. Maybe it could work again. Maybe better now, with what tech could do. He opened the toolbox. The hinges squeaked. Inside were tools that hadn't been touched in years, but still felt like extensions of his hands. He started cleaning the bench. Wiping down the workspace. Moving slow, but with purpose. By evening, he had laid out a small section for components. He plugged in the soldering iron just to see if it still heated up. It did. That night, over canned soup and toast, he watched another Elon interview. This time about failure. Failure is not the opposite of success, Elon said, it's part of it. If things aren't failing, you're not innovating enough. Hal wrote that down on a napkin. Taped it above the garage workbench the next morning. And for the first time in years, he felt like the gears were turning again. Maybe slowly. But they were turning. The silence was still there. But beneath it, something else was growing. Something like hope. It started with a headache that wouldn't go away and a heaviness in Hal's chest that felt like someone had stacked bricks inside him. The kind of pain that made a man look at his reflection and wonder if there was anything left in the mirror worth fighting for. He sat on the edge of the bed, legs aching, back stiff, blinking through the blur of another sleepless night. Outside, dawn was rising slow and colorless. His pill bottles rattled as he opened the cabinet, 7 different medications lined up like soldiers, each one with a job to do, and none of them interested in curing what was really wrong with him. He dry swallowed the blood pressure pills and stared at the wallpaper peeling in the corner of the bathroom. It used to have tiny blue flowers. Now it just looked tired. He knew the feeling. The doctor had been kind but blunt. "Hal, you're 72. I don't recommend pushing yourself. Walk, stretch, keep your mind active, but take it easy, okay?" Hal had nodded, thanked him, and walked out of the office feeling like he'd been given a life sentence with polite language. Take it easy. As if he hadn't already been taking it easy for years. As if stillness was the same thing as safety. The problem was never just physical. It was mental. Emotional. He didn't say that out loud, but it lived in the way he stood, the way he avoided mirrors, the way he hesitated before turning on the garage light like he might catch a glimpse of a ghost version of himself, 35, covered in grease, full of ideas and caffeine and hope. He heard that voice in his head again, is it too late? Some days it was louder than others. Some days it echoed in every room of the house, bouncing off empty picture frames and unopened letters. Is it too late to matter? Too late to fix what was broken? Too late to reconnect with a daughter who barely returned your calls? He hadn't spoken to Rachel in almost 5 months, not really. A few texts. A thumbs-up emoji. That was it. She was busy, of course. Everyone was. But it didn't change the way the silence between them felt heavier than anything else in his life. It wasn't just her. It was everything. The way the world seemed to move on without him. Like he was background noise in someone else's movie. He didn't belong in this age of smartphones and voice assistants and cars that drove themselves. He remembered trying to pay cash for groceries a few months ago, and the cashier looked at him like he'd handed her ancient currency. "We don't really take cash anymore, sir. Tap or chip. Tap or chip." That stuck in his mind. Two words that confirmed how far behind he really was. And yet, there was still something flickering in him. That spark he hadn't felt in decades. A memory rising up when he least expected it, like a song he forgot he loved. He could see himself at 34, hunched over a circuit board with Rachel watching, her eyes wide, her voice full of awe. "It's like magic, Dad." "No," he had said, grinning, "it's math and faith." He still believed that. Still wanted to believe that. But it was hard, because now the garage was just a tomb of unfinished things, and Rachel's admiration had been replaced by skepticism, polite concern, and maybe even disappointment. She had once believed in him. Maybe more than he believed in himself. Now she was working on robots for commercial contracts while he struggled to remember where he put his damn glasses. But he'd started again. That was something. He'd pulled out the blueprints. Watched the Elon Musk interviews. He'd written down quotes, even taped one to the garage wall like a banner in a foxhole. He wasn't sure what he was doing yet. But something inside him refused to go dark. Then came the email. It landed in his inbox late on a Tuesday night. Subject, checking in. It was from Rachel. Short. Clinical. "Hey Dad, just checking in. Hope you're feeling okay. Don't forget to take your meds. If you need anything, let me know. R." Hal stared at it for 15 minutes before replying. He typed, "Thanks. I'm good. Thinking of starting a little project again. You remember the garage stuff?" Then deleted it. Too vague. Too vulnerable. He typed again, "I've been looking at my old autonomous car plans. Wondering if it's worth revisiting. Not saying I'll build anything. Just, thinking about it." Then deleted that too. Finally he just typed, "Thanks. I'm doing okay." And sent it. He hated himself for it. He wanted to say more. But there was a wall between them now, built slowly over time with years of quiet resentment, missed birthdays, misunderstood words. He didn't know how to climb over it. That night, he couldn't sleep. He got up, padded into the kitchen, and poured himself a glass of water. On the counter, his old iPad lit up with a notification. YouTube, autoplay. Another Elon video. He let it run. Musk was speaking at a conference. Someone asked him why he kept pushing boundaries. Because, Elon said, if something is possible in the laws of physics, then it's achievable. Age, background, resources, they're obstacles. Not barriers. You remove the obstacle, or you climb over it. But you don't stop. Hal sat down at the table and let that sentence soak in. It wasn't flashy. But it was direct. You remove the obstacle. Or you climb over it. Or you don't stop. He whispered the words to himself. Then got up and went to the garage. It was midnight. The air was cool. The garage light flickered on with a faint buzz. The workbench was clean now. The blueprints were spread out. He took a deep breath and opened the drawer where he kept the soldering iron. His hand trembled as he plugged it in. It glowed orange after a moment. He picked up a breadboard and a handful of jumper wires. Then he stopped, frozen. What's the point? That voice again. The familiar whisper. What's the point of building something no one will use? What's the point of chasing a dream when you're this far down the road? He closed his eyes and pressed his hands to the table. Because it still matters to me. That was the answer. Not for a prize. Not for validation. Not even for Rachel. But because the work mattered. The spark mattered. That quiet feeling that he still had something to give. The next day, he went to the library and checked out a book on Arduino systems. The librarian gave him a surprised look. He smiled, shrugged. Just getting back into a hobby. She smiled back. Good for you. Good for you. It didn't sound condescending. It sounded real. He took the book home and read for 3 hours. His eyes ached. His neck hurt. He loved it. The following week, he went to a local electronics store and bought a basic sensor kit. The young man at the counter, maybe 25, raised an eyebrow. This for a school project? Hal chuckled. Something like that. He started small. A motion detector with a buzzer. Then a light sensor. Then object detection using ultrasonic range finders. Each tiny success lit a fire inside him. He posted a short video to a forum for senior tinkerers. Just a clip of the sensor lighting up when he waved his hand. It got 5 likes. One comment said, "Looks great. Keep going, Wrench75. Wrench75. That was the username he'd picked. 75, but not buried. Not yet. Rachel called a few days later. Real time, not a text. Dad? I saw your video. He was so surprised he almost dropped his phone. You did? Yeah. Someone in my lab sent it to me. Said, "Is this your dad? I didn't know you were messing with sensors again." Her tone wasn't mocking. Just curious. He hesitated. I figured I'd see what's still up here, he said, tapping his temple. She was quiet for a second. Then, softer, "You're not gonna hurt yourself, are you? Not unless I solder my finger to a breadboard." She laughed. He hadn't heard that sound from her in a long time. Just, don't overdo it. Okay. He wanted to tell her everything. About the plans. The quote on the wall. The way Elon's words had shaken something awake. But instead, he just said, "I won't. Promise." That night, he wrote a new line above his workbench, "The world didn't move on without me. I just needed to start walking again." And with that, the inner war didn't end, but it shifted. From fear to fire. From doubt to direction. From silence to motion. It was a Wednesday morning when Hal finally did it. Not a grand gesture, not some dramatic breakthrough. Just one quiet decision that, for reasons he didn't yet understand, would change everything. He got dressed, not in his usual loose sweatpants and flannel shirt, but in jeans, a belt, a tucked-in t-shirt, and a jacket. He laced up his old work boots, the ones that still smelled faintly of oil and leather and days when he built things that hummed and clicked and worked. Then he went outside and walked. Not to the mailbox. Not to the corner store. He walked around the block. Slowly at first. Each step stiff, the pavement unforgiving beneath his knees, but something in him refused to stop. He walked past houses he hadn't looked at in years. Past Mr. Klein's place with the rusted-out lawnmower in the yard. Past the yellow ranch where that teenager practiced his trumpet every Sunday afternoon. Past the empty lot where a church used to stand. The neighborhood hadn't changed all that much. But Hal had. At the halfway point, near the dead-end cul-de-sac where kids used to skateboard, he paused to catch his breath. His chest burned. His back screamed. But his heart felt alive. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, bending over with his hands on his knees. "I'm 72. I should be at home watching reruns of Matlock." But he wasn't. He was moving. Forward. And something about that felt like rebellion. When he got back home, sweaty and sore, he didn't collapse into the recliner like usual. He went straight to the garage, powered up the laptop, and opened a new file, Guidelight Project, 2025 revision. He started typing. Not a blueprint. Not a schematic. Just a list. What he remembered, what he wanted to rebuild, what he didn't know how to do anymore. It was a mess. But it was his mess. By lunch, he drafted a basic sketch of how the lane detection module might work using modern sensors. He watched a tutorial on LiDAR, realized he couldn't afford it, and pivoted to using a vision-based system with open-source code. Everything was harder now. His fingers didn't move the way they used to. His eyes tired quickly. The tech had leapt forward like a deer over a fence while he'd been sleeping. But he didn't stop. Because something had shifted inside him, something fundamental. He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. Not to Rachel. Not to the doctor. Not to the cashier who called him sweetie. He was doing it for himself. For the kid he used to be. For the husband Carol remembered. For the man who had once said out loud, "One day, cars will see better than we can." That afternoon, he posted his second video. Just a short one. 30 seconds of a breadboard lighting up when a toy car passed in front of a sensor. He added a caption, "Early stage object detection test." The brain's a little slower, but the hands still remember. He didn't expect much. Maybe a like. Maybe a bot comment. But the next day, it had over 300 views. Someone had shared it on a small Reddit thread about elder inventors. One comment stood out, "This guy's legit. Reminds me of my grandpa who used to build radios." Subscribed. Hal grinned when he read it. It wasn't fame. It wasn't money. But it felt like oxygen. That weekend, he tried something bolder. He took apart an old RC car he found at a yard sale and began installing the basic detection module onto the chassis. It took him 3 days, a roll of electrical tape, and a lot of swearing. But when the wheels finally moved and the tiny LED blinked in response to the sensor's trigger, Hal actually laughed out loud. Not a chuckle. A real laugh. The kind that made the garage echo with life again. The kind that used to make Carol peek her head in and say, "What did you blow up now?" That night, he wrote Rachel an email. A real one this time. No small talk. No weather updates. Just the truth. "Hey kiddo. Thought you might want to see what I've been up to. Pulled the old project out of the dust. Turns out my hands still know their way around a circuit. I'm rebuilding the guidelight system, starting small. Not trying to make Tesla sweat or anything, just proving to myself that I'm not done yet. Hope you're well. Would love to show you sometime. Dad." He hovered over send for a long time. Then clicked. Then waited. Days passed. Nothing. He told himself not to check the inbox. But he did. Every morning. Every night. Still nothing. It stung, of course. But it didn't stop him. Because something else had started happening. His neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Pennington from 3 houses down waved at him during his morning walk. Said she'd seen his video. Said her grandson watched it in school. Hal blinked, stunned. School? Yeah, some kind of tech program at the community center. He showed it to his class. Said it was inspiring. Inspiring. That word hit like a hammer. The idea that some 14-year-old kid somewhere had looked at his messy garage build and felt inspired. That felt like everything. By the following week, he'd started posting regular updates. Once a week. Short, honest, a little shaky with the camera, but always full of that quiet, steady focus. He didn't try to sound young. Didn't try to be hip. He just explained things the way he always had, like building was a kind of language, and all you had to do was listen hard enough to hear it. His channel grew. Slowly. 10 subscribers. Then 50. Then 200. He called it, Guidelight Garage. The tagline was simple, it's never too late to start building again. Then one morning, he woke up to find an email in his inbox. Not from Rachel. From a production assistant working for a small documentary series about late-in-life innovators. They wanted to do a feature on him. He read the email 5 times. Then once more, out loud. We believe your story could inspire others to rediscover their creativity, regardless of age. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know if he was ready. But the idea that someone, somewhere, believed he had something to offer, it broke something loose inside him. That same day, he got a text from Rachel. Just 5 words. Saw your video. You're amazing. He stared at the screen, heart pounding. Then she sent another, do you remember the rover we built when I was 12? I do. It's why I do what I do now. He sat down on the kitchen floor and cried. Not from sadness. From release. From the realization that maybe he hadn't failed completely. Maybe something he'd done had lived on in her. Maybe he hadn't lost her. Not completely. And in the quiet afterward, something else became clear. That one small choice, to walk around the block, to open the box of blueprints, to solder a wire, wasn't just the start of a project. It was the start of a return. A return to purpose. To motion. To belief. Elon Musk wasn't a god to him. He didn't worship the man. But there was something in Elon's refusal to stop, something in his sheer disregard for limitations, that had woken up a voice Hell thought was long dead. Not a voice that shouted. A voice that whispered, keep going. And so he did. One small change. One walk. One line of code. One daughter's text. That's how it begins. The air was thick with rain that hadn't fallen yet, the sky hanging low and gray like a heavy thought waiting to break. Hal stood in the garage, sleeves rolled up, staring at the half-finished rig mounted to the RC car frame like it was the most important machine in the world. And to him, it was. The prototype wasn't fancy, it was held together with zip ties and solder, the sensors mounted to a strip of aluminum he cut with a hacksaw. But it worked. Not perfectly. Not yet. But well enough that the car could detect a wall, veer slightly, and keep going without crashing. That alone made Hal feel like he'd touched the future. It had taken weeks to get here. Endless tweaking. Late nights. Headaches. Doubt. The hardest part hadn't been the code or the electronics. It had been staying in the game long enough to believe he could still contribute something. He'd forgotten how to think like a builder, but muscle memory had its own kind of wisdom. Still, there were setbacks. Always setbacks. Like the day the motor controller fried and nearly smoked the whole board. Or the night the code crashed mid-run and sent the car hurtling into his toolbox, scattering screws and wire like confetti. Or the deep, bone-deep fear that maybe this was all just a desperate old man clinging to relevance. But then came the breakthrough. It happened without warning, like most good things. Hal had been adjusting the camera mount when he noticed a flicker in the feed. Not static. Recognition. The sensor locked onto the edge of the garage wall, and paused. The motor slowed. Then redirected. Smooth. Clean. Autonomous. His breath caught. He froze, staring at the screen like it might vanish. Holy hell, he whispered. He watched it again. Then a third time. Each time, the machine reacted just a little better. It was crude, yes, but it was thinking, or at least mimicking the first step. That night, he recorded the demo and posted it. No flashy editing. No music. Just raw footage of a 72-year-old man holding up a breadboard with grease on his fingers and pride in his eyes. Guide light test run, we have basic avoidance. The caption read. In the video, he smiled, an honest, boyish smile, and said, "It's not fast, and it's not pretty. But it's learning. And I think I am too." He figured maybe a few hundred people would watch it. But by morning, the views were in the thousands. By noon, tens of thousands. Comments poured in. This is the kind of story I needed today. My dad gave up building after retirement. I'm sending him this. You're not done, sir. Not even close. The video was picked up by a mid-sized tech blog that featured late bloomers in STEM. The article was short, but respectful. Meet Hal Thompson, a former factory engineer from Dayton, Ohio, who decided to dust off an old autonomous driving project after hearing a quote from Elon Musk. It included a screenshot from the video, Hal holding the circuit board, eyes lit up. Someone even made a meme, when you're 72 but still launching your first startup from the garage. Hal laughed so hard he almost dropped his coffee. Rachel called that night. Her voice was soft, but something in it had changed. Less distance. More wonder. "Dad," she said, "I saw the article. You're kind of viral. Is that good or bad?" "It's good. Really good." She hesitated. "You're getting attention. Real attention. There's a guy at my lab, he saw your video and said, this guy's doing vision processing the hard way. Old school, but clever." Hal leaned back in his chair. "Clever, huh? He's 27, Dad. And he thinks you're cool." He chuckled. "Well, that's a first." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she added, "I'm proud of you. You know that, right?" The words hit him harder than he expected. Not because he didn't believe them, but because he hadn't realized how much he needed to hear them. "Thanks, kiddo," he said, voice thick. "Means a lot. And hey," she said, "if you ever want a second pair of eyes on the code. I mean, I'm not bad with object recognition." His throat tightened. He swallowed hard. "I'd like that. A lot." For the first time in years, they didn't hang up awkwardly. They kept talking, for over an hour. About sensors. About robotics. About life. She even asked about Mom. They hadn't talked about Carol in months. Maybe years. Hal told her about the way Carol used to come into the garage with a cup of tea and a skeptical look. "She always thought I was going to blow something up," he said. Rachel laughed. "You almost did. Twice. That's just good engineering." "No, that's just you being stubborn." "Same thing." They both laughed, and the silence between them, that awful, brittle silence that had hung like a wall for so long, finally cracked. The next day, Hal got an invitation in his inbox. A podcast wanted to interview him. A real one, Tech Rewired, which he'd actually listened to before. They called it the Garage Series, Builders Who Never Stopped. Hal almost declined. What did he have to say to a tech audience filled with 20-somethings and startup founders? But then he remembered something Elon had said in a keynote: if you have a voice, use it. If you have a story, share it. You never know who needs to hear it. So he said yes. The interview was over Zoom. Hal cleaned up the garage, propped the iPad on a stack of old textbooks, and practiced what he might say. When the host, a sharp young guy named Marco, introduced him, Hal smiled and waved. "Mr. Thompson, welcome. We've been excited about this one. You sure you've got the right guy?" "Absolutely. Your video hit something in people. Not just the tech. The spirit. People are saying you've redefined what it means to keep building." Hal blinked. "Well, I'm just trying not to go rusty." The interview ran for an hour. They talked about his background, his early experiments, the time he tried to build a self-driving lawn mower and it crashed into the neighbor's shed. They talked about how he got inspired again. About Elon's quote. "I don't know the man," Hal said, "but he has a way of saying things that shake you loose. Like, maybe I'd been asleep at the wheel." And that quote, "We don't bury people until 75, well, it made me realize I'd been acting like I was already gone." "But you're not," Marco said. "Far from it." When the episode aired, it hit number 8 on the platform's trending list. Thousands more views followed. People sent messages, some from Europe, some from Asia. Older men and women saying they were pulling their own projects out of storage. One man from Idaho wrote, "I started building a weather balloon with my granddaughter because of you." A woman from Florida said, "I enrolled in a night class at 68. I thought I was too old to learn code. Not anymore." Hal read every message. Some made him cry. Not out of sadness, but recognition. People weren't just rooting for him. They were seeing themselves in him. That was the real breakthrough. Not the sensor rig. Not the code. Not the views. But the realization that he wasn't alone. That there were thousands, maybe millions, of people who had quietly, painfully decided they were done, simply because the world stopped expecting things from them. And now, because of one small decision in a dusty garage, some of them were waking up too. Hal started ending his videos with a new line. "It's not about going back. It's about moving forward in a way that still matters." That became the heart of Guidelight Garage. That became the message. It wasn't about chasing glory. It was about purpose. About using the time you have, the skills you've honed, the love you've buried under years of silence, and putting it back into the world. In a world obsessed with youth and speed and disruption, Hal had become something else. Not a relic. Not a novelty. A reminder. That depth matters. That time doesn't erase value. That even an old circuit can carry a new current. And every time the camera rolled, every time he powered up the little car and watched it dodge the wall, he felt it in his bones. Not the ache of age. But the hum of purpose. The current of something true. The beginning of something not yet done. The letter came in a plain envelope with no return address, just Hal's name written in careful cursive that looked strangely familiar. He found it wedged between a grocery flyer and a medical bill, nearly missed it, almost tossed it. But when he opened it, unfolded the single sheet of paper, and read the words written in blue ink, he had to sit down. "Dear Mr. Thompson, I don't know if you remember me, but my name is Jonah, and I was your student in the robotics club back in 1996. I saw your video last week. I recognized your voice before I even saw your face. You told me once that I had an engineer's brain and an artist's heart. That stuck with me. I never said thank you. I'm saying it now. I'm a robotics instructor at a community college in Missouri, and I just showed my students your video." One of them started crying. She said, "If he can do that at 72, I can't give up at 22. That's legacy. I hope you know that." Hal read the letter 3 times. The 4th time, he read it out loud. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. He folded the paper neatly and tucked it into a manila folder marked, Guidelight. The folder was growing thick now, sketches, sensor diagrams, emails, and now, Jonah's letter. A different kind of blueprint. Not for a machine, but for something deeper. Something human. That night, Hal didn't sleep. He sat in the garage, just staring at the little car as it sat still on the workbench. He could hear the hum of the fridge inside, the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Time marching on. But he wasn't afraid of it anymore. For the first time in decades, he wasn't scared of what was behind him, or what was coming. He was building something that would outlast the shell of metal and wires. He was building a message. A way forward. 4 others. He turned to his laptop and began typing. Not code this time. A proposal. A lesson plan. He titled it, Late Starters, Hands-on Robotics for the 60-plus Crowd. He knew what people thought, what society whispered under its breath. That learning stops at 50. That 60 is for slowing down. That 70 is the quiet slide into irrelevance. He knew the numbers. He'd lived them. But he also knew this, the mind doesn't die with age. It dulls when unused. It stiffens when caged. And it reignites when given permission to chase wonder again. He sent the plan to the local community center. A week later, they responded. We'd love to pilot this, the director wrote. We have 5 interested participants already. Would you be willing to teach it? Hal stared at the screen. He'd never taught a class before, not formally. Just workshops, club meetings, casual mentoring. But something in him, some deeper, older truth, rose to the surface like a diver breaking through. Say yes. So he did. The first session was on a Thursday morning in September. 5 people showed up. Mary, 68, who used to be a seamstress. George, 73, a retired truck driver. Susan, 66, who had taught elementary school for 40 years. Larry and Paul, 2 war veterans who had been best friends since Vietnam and claimed they were only there because there was free coffee. Hal introduced himself, heart pounding. This isn't about turning anyone into an engineer, he said. This is about reigniting the part of you that used to be curious. That part of you didn't die. It's just been waiting for you to knock the dust off. He showed them the RC car, explained how sensors work, let them touch the breadboard, handle the wires. Their eyes lit up like children. George said, feels like I'm back in the Army motor pool. Susan said, why didn't they teach this to girls in the 60s? By the end of the hour, Mary had wired her first LED. It lit up green. She clapped and laughed like a kid who'd just learned a magic trick. I haven't done anything new in years, she said, wiping her eyes. This feels like being alive again. Hal stood in the corner and just watched. And for the first time, the word legacy made sense, not as a name on a building or a plaque on a wall, but as a ripple. A torch passed hand to hand. Not downward, but outward. Rachel came to visit a few weeks later. She brought lunch, her laptop, and a folder of design schematics. Thought you might want to see what I've been working on, she said, smiling. Hal nearly choked on his sandwich. You mean you want my opinion? Dad, I watched you turn a toy car into a functioning detection system. Yeah, I want your opinion. They sat in the garage for hours, shoulder to shoulder, talking code, talking strategy, talking life. Rachel opened up in a way she hadn't since she was a teenager. She told him about the pressure she felt in Silicon Valley, the imposter syndrome, the burnout. Everyone's in their 20s. They think if you're over 30, you're already obsolete. Hal laughed. Imagine what they'd think of me. They'd be lucky to have you, she said. Later that evening, before she left, she stood in the doorway of the garage and said, I don't know if I ever told you, but the reason I got into robotics wasn't the classes or the teachers. It was the rover we built together. The one that used forks and coat hangers and duct tape. You looked at me like I could build anything. I never forgot that. Hal didn't have words. Just tears. He nodded, took her hand, and said the only thing he could. I'm proud of you. That winter, Guide Light Garage was featured in a national article titled, Makers Over 60 Who Are Changing the World. Hal's face was on the front page, holding a soldering iron and grinning. He didn't care about the attention. What mattered was the email flood that came after. A 78-year-old woman from Montana who built a drone with her grandson. A 65-year-old man in Brooklyn who reprogrammed an old Roomba into a window washer. People who had thought their best days were over, and suddenly found they had more to give. The ripple kept growing. One morning, Hal was walking past the mirror in the hallway when he stopped and looked, really looked. The lines on his face hadn't vanished. The gray in his beard was still there. His posture still bent with the weight of time. But his eyes were different. They burned. Not with youth. With purpose. With clarity. He whispered to the man in the mirror, "I thought I was waiting for the world to notice me again. But I was really just waiting to remember who I was." And then he smiled. Not because everything was perfect. But because it didn't have to be. He had found the thing people spend entire lives searching for, the intersection of memory and meaning. He wasn't too late. He was right on time. In the garage that night, he looked at the latest version of his build. The car was better now. Cleaner code. Faster reaction time. Rachel had helped him improve the object recognition model. It could even identify stop signs with 78% accuracy. Not bad for a garage project. But that wasn't the victory. The victory was in the class of retirees who met every Thursday to learn from him. The victory was in the children of those retirees who started watching the classes and saying, "I didn't know my dad was this smart." The victory was in the quiet email from a woman in Texas who said, "I was planning to give up. Your video changed my mind." Legacy wasn't something you leave behind. It was something you plant now. Something that grows every time you choose to rise, to try, to build. Elon Musk was never a savior in Hal's story. But he was the spark. The reminder that rules could be broken, timelines rewritten, expectations shattered. The quote on the garage wall had faded a little, but Hal still looked at it every day. You remove the obstacle, or you climb over it. But you don't stop. He hadn't stopped. And now, neither would the people watching him. Neither would the people rediscovering what they could be. Neither would the legacy he had created, circuit by circuit, lesson by lesson, heart by heart. Hal's hands trembled, not from age, but from something closer to anticipation, as he opened the box containing the parts he'd ordered online. Stuff most people called obsolescent, an old Raspberry Pi 4, a used webcam, sketchy wiring, some sensor modules. They sat atop his workbench, ordinary components that carried extraordinary potential. He remembered Elon's words, the ones he'd scribbled on a napkin and taped above the bench, "Most people can learn a lot more than they think they can. They sell themselves short without trying." That quote, echoing in his head now, felt like permission. Permission to try, to learn, to fail, and to begin again. The first step was simple: plug in the Pi. The unit whirred to life, the little colored LEDs blinking like a newborn's heartbeat. He connected the webcam and watched the display flicker as the camera feed appeared on the screen. He blinked. He leaned forward. He remembered how it felt to coax life out of a circuit board. He typed commands line by line, the syntax awkward at first, his fingers unfamiliar with the keyboard, but they found rhythm again. He watched online tutorials, rewinding passages that made his head swim, pausing when his eyes burned, pushing again when they cleared. One voice from a YouTube instructor stood out: vision-based lane detection, this is where affordability meets innovation. Hal repeated that line out loud. Lane detection. Affordable innovation. Two words that bridged his youth and this moment. 3 days later, the webcam recognized the colored tape he'd stuck on the workbench. The screen lit up when the camera saw green tape, and the Pi triggered a buzzer. It was almost comical, primitive, but to Hal, it was electric. He recorded a short clip and posted, "Basic color detection demo." The old mind still moves when the code clicks. He expected a handful of views. Instead, he woke up to 2,000. Messages poured in: "My mother didn't think she could code at 80. You're inspiring her. Grandpa's trying again because of you. Thank you for showing me curiosity has no age." He blinked at the screen. Curiosity has no age. That line stuck. Energy began to surge through him like current through a conductor. He ordered a cheap motor hat for the Pi and rigged a second breadboard to control a wheel. He turned an old toy car chassis into a test vehicle again, but smarter this time. Camera wired to detect color markers. Motor signals to steer. He went slow. Too slow by modern standards. But each time the car avoided crashing, each subtle correction, each tiny successful loop around the bench, it felt like rewriting destiny. Rachel video called one evening. She watched him manipulate the wiring, coached him through configuring OpenCV, the field of view, threshold algorithms. "You're actually making me hold my breath," she said. He tried to joke, "Stop treating me like I don't speak Python." She laughed. It was the kind of easy laughter he hadn't heard in years. They worked together over the distance. He soldered, she debugged lines of code. She sent over a sketch she'd drawn, autonomous modules mounted on a slow-moving desktop prototype. He traced her lines with his fingers and felt his heart catch. Together, they were building, not just machines, but something unexpected, reconnection. Hal's weekly videos shifted tone. From hopeful tinkering to focused learning. He spoke about learning curves, about frustration, about rediscovering the way failure teaches more than success ever could. He quoted Elon again, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." And he added, quietly, "I suppose this is important enough." His audience wasn't massive, but the comments were intimate. A woman from Iowa shared that she started taking community classes. A man from Denver sent a photo of his first solder joint. A teenager wrote, "My granddad sent me Control-Z commands. He said, if Hal Thompson can do it, why not me?" It wasn't fame. It was family. It was others waking up. He looked around his garage one night, empty boxes, a spoke from a bicycle, a faded Polaroid of Carol smiling at the doorframe. He picked up the photo and whispered, "I'm doing it. We're doing it." The house didn't creak in response. But somewhere beyond, the world shifted. And inside him, the future rewrote itself. It started as a hum in the dark, a sound that barely registered but wouldn't go away, an electrical whisper from the prototype's charging rig that Hal had left running overnight. He woke around 3 a.m., the hallway quiet except for the old house settling like bones stretching in the cold. He stood in the doorway of the garage, barefoot, with only the dim LED of the Raspberry Pi blinking softly like a pulse. And then it hit him, this wasn't just a project anymore. This garage, these wires, this crude chassis rolling forward one careful inch at a time, they were the last thing he thought about before sleep and the first thing his mind returned to when he woke. Not out of obsession. Out of something deeper. Out of love. Not for the machine, but for what it allowed him to feel again, necessary. Useful. Alive. He pulled on a flannel shirt and padded across the floor to his bench, where the prototype sat half-assembled, waiting. It had stalled again during a loop test earlier that day, its object detection confused by a shadow cast from a shelf. A week ago, Hal would have called it a setback. But now, he smiled. Shadows were just another challenge. He adjusted the sensor angle by 3 degrees and scribbled a note in the margin of his journal. Shadows cause uncertainty. Maybe people do too. He sat back in the creaking office chair that Carol had bought him 20 years ago and stared at the robot. He began speaking to it, not because he expected an answer, but because the silence no longer intimidated him. "You're going to get confused," he whispered. "But so do we. The trick is to keep moving anyway." By morning, he'd solved the shadow problem. Not through better code, but by blocking peripheral light with a 3D, printed hood that Rachel helped him design remotely. They emailed almost every day now, their conversations bouncing between algorithms, memories of her childhood, and philosophical questions about the future. "Do you think machines will ever be better drivers than people?" she asked once. Hal paused, then typed, "I think the point isn't whether they're better. It's that they never get tired. They don't forget. They don't carry pain. He stared at that last sentence. Maybe that was why he was building this. Maybe it wasn't about AI or self-driving cars at all. Maybe it was about building something that could go on, even when he couldn't. That week, the community center robotics group doubled in size. Word had spread. Mary brought a friend, Susan recruited a neighbor, and Larry posted a flyer at the VFW. The newcomers were curious, cautious, but Hal welcomed them all the same. "We're not here to be perfect," he told them. "We're here to try." They split into teams, some focused on code, some on wiring, some just learning to hold a soldering iron again. Hal watched George teach an 80-year-old man named Art how to debug a faulty LED, and for a moment, it felt like a portal had opened, a place where time bent, where 70 was 20 if you believed it could be. He started filming their sessions and uploading them under a new playlist called Late Bloomers Build. The comments were electric. "Watching this with my mom, we're signing up for a community tech class." My dad's face lit up for the first time in months. "Thank you." Someone even reached out from a local TV station, asking to film a segment. Hal almost declined. He hated the spotlight. But Rachel urged him. "This isn't about you, Dad. It's about them, everyone out there who thinks they've run out of road." So he said yes. The news team showed up with lights and microphones, but Hal refused to stage anything. "Just roll the camera and don't ask us to smile," he said. "We'll do that on our own, if we get something working." They filmed for hours. They captured Mary's first servo run, George accidentally burning a resistor, Art quietly whispering, "I can't believe I did that." The segment aired 3 nights later under the title Golden Age Engineers. It wasn't flashy. But it was honest. And the next morning, Guidelight Garage's YouTube channel doubled in subscribers. Again. Emails began pouring in, from church groups, nursing homes, even a prison rehab center asking if he could share his lesson plans. Hal printed every single one and placed them in a growing stack on his desk. One message stood out. It was from a woman in Michigan. "My husband is 84 and hasn't touched his workbench in a decade. But when he saw your video, he asked me where I'd put his soldering iron. He's building again. So thank you, not just for him, but for me. I got my husband back." The ripple effect was real. And Hal felt it every time he stepped into the garage now. He no longer saw the clutter or the rust or the wear on the tools. He saw potential. Rebirth. Proof that sparks could still fly in dark places. And yet, despite the momentum, doubt crept in again late one night. The prototype car had hit a dead loop in the code. No matter what he tried, it kept spinning in circles when facing certain lighting conditions. He slammed the workbench with his fist, instantly regretting it. "Damn it," he muttered. "Maybe this is all just a nice story that doesn't go anywhere." The garage was silent. The Pi kept blinking. He slumped into the chair, ran his hand over his face, and thought of Elon. Not the billionaire. The man. The builder. The guy who'd slept under his desk at Tesla, who'd fired rockets that exploded on live TV, who once said, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." Hal whispered those words. "If you're not failing," he stood up, grabbed a notebook, and began listing every condition under which the car failed. Light angles. Reflectivity. Floor contrast. He created a matrix, tested variables, and began again. 2 days later, the bug was fixed. It had been a flaw in the image thresholding parameters, too sensitive to overexposed pixels. He adjusted it. The car rolled forward, paused, turned. Smooth. Steady. Resilient. "That's it," he whispered. "That's how we do it. Not by being perfect. But by continuing." That week, Rachel visited again. This time, she brought her son. Hal's grandson, Evan, 8 years old, curious as a squirrel and twice as fast. Hal hadn't seen him in over a year, not since the funeral, not since the days when silence filled the air between father and daughter. Evan ran straight into the garage, eyes wide. "Mom says you build robots. Can I see?" Hal nodded, stunned, and handed him the remote. "Try it." Evan guided the prototype around the obstacle course Hal had created out of soda cans and tape. "Whoa, it moves on its own." "A little bit," Hal said, smiling. "It's learning. Like me." Evan grinned. Rachel sat beside her father, watching Evan move. "He wants to learn to code," she said. "He watches your videos with me. You've become his favorite YouTuber." Hal looked at her, eyes brimming. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to. Just, keep doing what you're doing." That night, they sat on the back porch together. No tension, no words that needed unpacking. Just air. Just stillness. Just love, weathered but enduring. Hal looked up at the stars and said, "You ever think about how we used to believe the stars were holes in heaven?" Rachel smiled. "And now we land rockets on ships in the ocean." "Yeah," Hal said. "And sometimes old men build dreams out of wires and dust." She took his hand. "You're not just building dreams, Dad. You're lighting torches." And somewhere inside him, something quiet and powerful ignited again. Sparks in the dark. And they were just getting started. No part of innovation happens in a flash. It's a sequence of half-lit ideas, scattered parts, midnight sorrows, small triumphs. For weeks, Hal had labored in the garage, each evening's progress brushed off as incremental, a cleaner code loop, a sensor reframe, a resoldered connection. But today was different. Today was the day the little RC car, born from wires, zip ties, and stubborn purpose, truly woke. He didn't notice the sunlight through the window glass growing sharper until he blinked. Then he realized, he'd been tuning etc. circuit boards for hours, hour fade as the garage's only witness. He blinked again and stood. The car sat at the center of a makeshift course, masking tape lanes, small obstacles he'd scavenged from around the house. A soda can. A pair of old books. One dusty tennis shoe. The chaos had become his testing ground. He gently placed the car at the start and hit run. At first, it crawled forward, hesitated at the turn, then, gathering confidence, steered, veered, paused, adjusted. He held his breath. The sensor matrix, OpenCV-enabled vision, handled by the Raspberry Pi, was parsing the green detection thresholds properly. The motor signals changed direction just as needed. Then, like a small rocket, the toy chassis sped through the course, turning gracefully around the block he'd laid out. He released the breath he didn't know he'd held. His heart hammered. His hands shook. He could hardly breathe. "Holy, I did it," he said, voice trembling, breathing uneven. He looked around to ensure no one was watching. Just him and the garage ghosts of hope. He stood up, wiping his palms on his jeans, and muttered, "It's alive." He replayed the video on his laptop, watching the car avoid the shoe. It even paused when the sensor flinched at a shadow. He watched anew, the motion smooth, lines guided with care. He leaned into the screen and said, "Okay. Now we're cooking." Later, he posted the demo, first full-run prototype, Guidelight version 1.0, it reads, it sees, it avoids. His eyes stung with tears as he typed. He hit upload, heart pounding. By evening, the video had thousands of views. Comments filled up fast. "I watched this with my dad, he's coming back to the workbench. My grandma just turned 70, she's asking me to teach her Python. You are proof that age doesn't stop the spark." Hal stared at the comments. Age doesn't stop the spark. It echoed. He barely slept that night. Instead, he sat reviewing frame-by-frame footage of the car, marking where improvements would come next: speed, detection range, smoother trajectory, battery life. And quietly, for the first time in years, hope felt tangible. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Hal had learned to expect resistance, not from the machine, but from life, and often it came when he least anticipated it. The morning light slanted through the garage window, and he winced as he stood. His back crackled, a reminder of decades behind him, not just years, but the weight of all the days he thought he'd lost. He shuffled his way to the workbench, fingers brushing the tools, the soldering iron, the breadboard, and reluctantly, he sank onto the stool. He'd been trying to optimize the prototype sensor array for days, but it kept glitching, either reading shadows as obstacles or missing the actual ones entirely. He muttered under his breath, "Maybe that glitch is a sign. Maybe I'm finally out of road." Then his phone buzzed, a voicemail from Rachel. He hesitated, momentum was easier than words, but he played it anyway. Her voice came shaky. "Dad. I know you haven't been sleeping well. Mom's sister, Aunt Margaret, passed last night. I'm sorry I can't come out. You should rest." The line went silent. Hal stared at his phone, grief and guilt folding over him. He'd never been good at goodbyes. Worse yet, he froze. He tried to reply but the words tangled uphill in his throat. He realized the growing distance, and now the real possibility of living with loose ends he couldn't repair. He punched the workbench softly, frustration stabbing up to his shoulder. Then, as often happens in the darkest moments, Elon's voice replayed in his head, not from video, but from memory: "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." He let that hang for a moment. He wasn't supposed to avoid failure. He was supposed to press through it. He gripped the prototype's frame and straightened his shoulders. The first stab of pain in his back doubled him over, but he stayed. He burned. He minimized the inner tempest with slow breaths. He steadied his hands. By afternoon, he'd recalibrated the code. He mounted a tiny lens hood to block the harsh garage light. And with deliberate care, he ran the car across the taped course. It reset. It steered. It corrected. The wheel adjusted just enough. It worked. Not perfectly, but it worked. Exhausted but alive, Hal backed away. Victory tasted bitter, but real. Late that night, he logged on to Guidelight Garage to post an update. Lesson: pain and grief are like static. Drown it out with motion. Prototype's lane detection is still stumbling, but progressing. He uploaded. Then he laid down and stared at the ceiling. Thoughts circling, his body failing, his only daughter grieving too, the world forgetting the man who nearly gave up. He fought off tears. He wasn't going to be buried quietly. Not yet. The next morning brought harsh electricity. His doctor's call: "The heart rate's not back to normal. I need you to take it easy." That phrase again. Take it easy. But something deeper stirred. A voice he'd buried years ago, the one Carol used to whisper: "You're stronger than you know." He told the doctor, "I'm doing something important." His voice cracked, but steadied. The doctor paused. Said nothing. That afternoon, haltingly, he texted Rachel, "Had a setback. Grief and pain caught up. But I didn't stop. Let's talk soon." He hit send and exhaled. He waited. Hours passed. He replayed the voicemail in his mind. What was there to say? He stared at the photo of Carol on his workbench. He said aloud, "Help me, kiddo." Just after dinner, the response came. "Dad, I'm so sorry about Aunt Margaret. I miss her, too. And I miss you. Let's start with a call." Just us. He swallowed, tears threatening, warmth bleeding into his chest. He typed back, call now. Then, love you. He added a flower emoji. Something they used to do. They spoke for 2 hours. Not just about Aunt Margaret or the prototype. About football games he never got to see her at. About the camper vacations when she said he rocked more than the canoe. About the leap she almost didn't take into robotics. She said, you always reminded me I could leap. He said, I still believe that. When they hung up, Hal sat in the dark. The house was quiet. But something had shifted, the silence wasn't empty. It was open. The next morning, the garage felt different, not a tomb of nearly abandoned dreams, but a healing room. He mapped out a maintenance schedule, for his back, his heart, his work. Work in 15-minute increments. Walk breaks. Drinking water. Sleep boundaries. He fixed the code again, smoothing the throughput, tuning the thresholds. Each fix small. Each fix real. But then criticism came from an unexpected corner, his neighbors. A knock one day, Mrs. Lopez from next door. Her brow was furrowed. Hal, I hate to say this. Your car noise, the late soldering, it's too much. He blinked. Pain flickered. The garage was not his sanctuary, it was his storm. He saw her point. He apologized, offered to keep hours earlier. She nodded. He shut the door gently. He leaned against it and wept softly. He thought of Elon's other quote, you have to be willing to be misunderstood if you're going to innovate. He breathed. Misunderstood. Better than invisible. He realized he'd become a kind of lightning bolt in the neighborhood, bright, noisy, occasionally unsettling, but illuminating. Hal adjusted hours. Limited his work to mornings. Quieter motors. He found compromise in motion. The next day, he finished a new run, smoother curves, refined lane mapping, a stable 82% success rate. He uploaded, lesson, innovation doesn't happen in perfect conditions. It happens in pain, in apology, in compromise. Still moving. Comments followed, I'm sorry your body is hurting, but I'm grateful you're still here. My grandpa's arthritis makes him stop, but your story makes him start again. Misunderstood doesn't mean wrong. Hal stared, read them again, misunderstood doesn't mean wrong. That night, he found an old message from Elon, when something is important enough, even if the odds aren't in your favor, you should still do it. He smiled through tears. The message wasn't about Tesla or rockets. It was about him. His age, his pain, his child, his heart. He hadn't defied the world. He'd defied himself. And the car, wobbling across the floor, wasn't just a prototype. It was proof. Proof that human purpose, when reignited, bends from spirals of pain into arcs of motion. Hal straightened. Drawn by vision. Motivated by memory. He wasn't done. And neither was his story. Hal woke to the sharp scent of coffee at sunrise, an aroma he hadn't savored in years, not like this. It was just before dawn, and the pale light filtered through the dusty garage window, illuminating the tidy chaos of parts and circuits on the bench. His back ached less today, he'd slept for a solid 6 hours, something that had become rare and precious since starting this project again. He slowly sat up and felt a rare buzz in his limbs, not exhaustion, but potential. Not only had his body begun to accommodate steady motion again, but his entire being was shifting towards something unexpected, momentum. He brewed a cup, strong, black, and promising, and stared at the prototype car resting on its stand. Weeks before, it had balked at each twist and corner. Now, he'd added a simple neural net element that let it learn how to correct its drifts slightly. Devoting just enough memory to detect the tape boundary, yet light enough to run on the Raspberry Pi. That night's test loop had ended with smoother arcs, gentler turns. The code was whispering to the wires, move, adapt, repeat. He took a sip and felt fire in his gut. At mid-morning, he booted up the laptop and began editing his weekly video. It was time to shift focus again, not just on personal progress, but the group he'd built. He filmed the empty garage, panning from the soldering station to the prototype to the folded flyer from the community center class. He spoke into the camera, voice low but steady. This week, the machine learned more than code. I learned that resurgence isn't flashy. It's quiet. It's sunrise before the world notices. He paused. It's you growing the courage to speak again after years of silence. He didn't say more. He pressed stop, and smiled, because he meant every word. His phone buzzed, an incoming message from Rachel. Grandpa Evan wants to try building a robot next weekend. Is that okay? His chest tightened. He texted back, bring him anytime. The garage door's always open. Then he paused and added, love you both. He didn't expect a reply. Hers came within seconds, love you too, Dad. Talk soon. Later that afternoon, the community center called. An attendee picked up a second kit at his suggestion. 2 friends signed up. There were now 7 people in the class. They wanted to name it Guidelight Live. Hal agreed. The words felt bigger than the room's 4 walls. It was real progress. He jotted ideas, more autonomous modules, maybe a small competition between teams. Purpose was growing around him like dawn. That evening, the doorbell rang. When he opened it, he was met by a slender elderly woman holding a tray of brownies. She said quietly, I saw your TV segment. I used to bake for my church's senior center, but maybe they'd like to build a robot too. Her eyes brimmed with hope, and Hal felt something kneel in him. He invited her in. They talked until she left about circuits and cookies, and when she pointed at his workbench and said, You've sparked something, he nodded, suddenly aware that what he thought was resurrection was actually ignition. Not just for him, but for others. He slept again, and dreamed of circuit diagrams dancing with dusty blueprints from decades ago. In the dream, Carol stood holding a soldering iron in her hand, smiling. He woke to the whir of notifications. The video, this week, the machine learned more than code, had thousands of new views. People wrote, my husband's getting dementia and doesn't make sense anymore. But last night, he said he'd like to try building something again. My 84-year-old neighbor saw this and asked for a kit. You make me believe in slow revival. He read them and felt something lift in his chest, like sunrise over a frozen landscape. That night, he rewatched Elon Musk's interview from 2012, where Musk said, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. He paused, reflecting. SpaceX had only a 10% chance. He barely had any odds, age, health, skepticism, but meaning was his fuel. He whispered, it's always been worth it. 2 days later, Hal and his class hosted a mini demo at the community center's open house. They set up a simple track, the prototype followed, and when it veered, the team cheered it back on. Families came. Smiles spread. Grandparents held hands with grandchildren over wiring diagrams. One young girl asked Hal, can robots feel? He knelt and said, only if you program them to care. She nodded, and for a moment, Hal wondered if he'd done that. He left the center and walked under twilight skies. On the drive home, he passed the intersection where the Tesla FSD car had glided by weeks ago, the one that ignited his second act. He watched as headlights approached and pulsed past. But tonight, he didn't feel past. He felt part of the pulse. Home, he stepped into the garage, flicked the light, warm, humming. He looked at his hands, scarred, old, steady. He whispered, resurgence. He sat and opened a new blank document. Title, Guide Light, a starter kit. The world was waking up. And in that garage, half dreams, half circuit, all heart, Hal realized he was only beginning. Hal's heart thudded with more than just age when he packed the prototype into the trunk of his old station wagon, that dented, reliable beast he'd driven for decades. The community center had invited him to host a live test drive event, on site, and he agreed, though his hands trembled slightly as he checked the wiring one last time. The garage felt different now. Hums of hope instead of rust, and as he closed the door, he whispered to the empty space, "Time to take you beyond these walls." The drive to the center felt surreal. He passed the intersection where the Tesla had glided past, and tonight, he wasn't invisible, he was carrying purpose in that trunk, alive, real. Behind the center's sliding doors, under bright fluorescent lights, he opened the trunk and assembled the prototype on a foldable table. The place buzzed with anticipation, retirees who'd become classmates, a few curious onlookers, a reporter from the local newspaper, and even some teens who wandered in between classes. Hal's hands moved familiar yet deliberate, tightening screws, plugging in the Raspberry Pi, securing the camera. And when he stepped back, he saw the entire class of Guide Light Live behind him, faces eager, eyes bright. He cleared his throat. Tonight, this little car isn't just demonstrating sensors. It's showing that the mind doesn't age out of possibility. He paused, and for a heartbeat, silence fell. Then he flipped the switch. The car stuttered, scanned the makeshift track, yellow tape forming a winding path, and rolled forward, slower than in the garage, but with determination. It turned corners, corrected direction, paused when nearing the edge, and, smoothly, navigated the path to applause. Hal felt tears burn in his eyes. These people had believed in him, now, 5 circuits later, they felt belief sparking back into themselves. The room erupted with claps. Mary, holding her hands to her mouth, laughed. George whooped. The teens nodded in recognition. Hal stumbled through the words, this is why we start. Not because we expect perfection. But because movement matters. He gestured to the car, the wires, the flickering LEDs. The reporter approached, voice warm, "This is going to be one of those community stories people remember." Hal just nodded. Memories of Carol flooded him, the evenings she almost walked into the garage to see what he had ruined, then ended up staying for hours. He blinked, held that memory close. Then came the surprise. Rachel stepped forward with Evan. 40 pairs of eyes turned. Behind them, a featherlight camera crew had appeared, filming quietly. She tapped her dad's shoulder. "We brought something." In her arms, a second prototype, mounted on a wider platform, co-developed in San Jose, a blend of her robotics finesse and his applied grit. The little robot was shaped more function than cobbled parts, but it was theirs. The room gasped. 6-year-olds leaned closer. The reporter murmured, "Another generation building on the spark." Hal's eyes brimmed. "We tested lane detection," Rachel said, voice steady. "But we framed it with sentiment. We thought if Dad could start at 72, maybe I could slow down, even when the world expects otherwise." There was quiet beyond that. Not echo. Stillness holding reverence. Then Evan pressed a button. The combined prototype wheeled forward, sensors guiding it along the taped lane, even slowing at curves, improved speed, smoother motion. Hal and Rachel high-fived. The crowd's faces glowed with possibility. People were crying. Others were texting parents. Teens asked for plans. Seniors gripped tools again. The numbers didn't matter. The feeling did. Afterwards, the reporter asked Hal softly, "What does this moment mean?" He swallowed hard and said, "It isn't the machine. It's that human current, learning, connection, time bending back on itself. The test drive, it proved we're not finished. We're just starting." He heard Elon's voice echo a memory, "When something is important enough, you do it, even if the odds are not in your favor." Not a rocket. Not a spaceship. Just a toy car, but a future unspooling. He looked at Rachel, at Evan. At the classmates around him. Legacy wasn't a monument. It was momentum. The article ran the next day, "Garage Dreams Drive a Community Awake." Comments online exploded, "I cried watching this because my dad hasn't fixed anything in years. Today he asked me to show him soldering. I'm turning 70. My heart is racing. That old toy is lighting new fire." Hal read one comment posted by a stranger, "Age isn't a prison. It's a vantage." He smiled, because for the first time, he knew what moving forward looked like from where he stood. That night, he tucked the prototypes away and sat by the window. Outside, rain tapped. Inside, quiet warmth. He thought of everything, the crash, the doubt, the miles walked, the code rewritten, the daughter returned, the neighbors, the class, Evan's wide eyes. He whispered, "This is for you, Carol." And he let himself cry, not with regret, but with resonance. Not with endings, but with echoes of beginnings. Because age doesn't end stories. It rewrites them. One test drive at a time. It was mid-morning when the call finally came through. Hal had just cleared his workbench, tools stacked neatly, prototype tucked away with earbuds beside it, and he answered, voice steady but curious. On the other end was Marco, the tech podcast host, dialing in from the city studio. "Mr. Thompson," he began, "so good to meet you. Your story, well, it's everything we hoped for." Hal cleared his throat and introduced himself softly. Then Marco pressed record, and the world leaned in. They started gently. How he got here, what lit the spark again. Hal answered simply, truthfully. "I heard Musk say once, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." It was a quote he'd taped above his workbench, and he said it aloud with reverence. It hit me, not as financial advice, but as life advice. I'd been waiting for permission to matter. That quote gave it to me. Marco leaned in, voice low, "What do people say when they see a 72-year-old building robotics in his garage?" Hal laughed. "They say I'm brave. Or foolish. Maybe both. I say I'm just human, rewriting what aging means." He paused, because there was more. "I thought my best years were behind me. Then one day, I realized they were right here, just waiting." The questions turned technical, and Hal explained how the prototype avoided obstacles with open-source vision code, how he tweaked the thresholds after shadow glitches. He acknowledged mistakes. Momentary lapses where it spun in circles, where lights fooled the sensors, where his own back betrayed him mid-solder, and layered in how Elon frames failure as part of the journey. Failure is an option here. "If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough," he quoted, voice gentle in the silence. Marco circled back, "What about tomorrow? What do you want people to hear from you?" Hal leaned back, breathing slow. "That you're never too old to change the story. That progress doesn't wait for birthdays, it moves when we choose to act. That legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's what you light up today." The episode aired the next day, and the ripple began anew. Hal's channel exploded. They included a highlight where he quietly said, "I'm just human, rewriting what aging means." Comments poured in. One from Virginia, just turned 70. "Ordered my first electronics kit in decades because of you." Another from Oregon, "You gave me my dad's old workbench back." A grandson called his grandfather, who found his old college tools in storage and said, "I think I'll take another crack at it." Hal watched the messages come in, nestled in the kitchen with his coffee growing cold. Every word felt like a quiet sunrise. He opened a text from Rachel. "Your voice is strong. I'm proud of you." No emojis this time. Just truth. That night, he walked into the garage. It was quiet, but alive. Shadows danced as the single bulb hummed overhead. He looked up at the taped note, "When something is important enough," and then over at the soldering iron, the camera, the masking tape track. He touched them like relics resurrected. He didn't feel older. He felt current. And in that moment, he realized he hadn't rewritten age. He'd rewritten possibility. The morning light in the garage was soft, warm, steady, a quiet sign that something had shifted. Hal sat at the edge of the workbench, tracing his finger over the worn blueprints of guide light, now layered with newer sketches, notes, and printed emails. His phone chimed again with another alert, this time, an email from a national tech magazine expressing interest in doing a feature story. He stared at the subject line, inspiring second acts, retool your future, and his stomach dropped, not with fear, but with the weight of things going beyond his world. The garage felt bigger suddenly. Reverberating with possibility. He packed more than the prototype that afternoon. He packed resolve, humility, and the love of a community rediscovering what purpose feels like. At the photo shoot, the lighting crew buzzed around him, the reporter asked questions he never thought he'd hear again, about engineering, about aging, about relevance. Hal answered simply, "I'm not building the future because I'm old. I'm building it because I never stopped hoping there was still one." He held the prototype car close, and when they took his picture, he didn't hide the trembling in his hands, it was a quiet badge of proof. The article dropped the next week with the headline, 72-year-old garage tinkerer sparks a movement. That night, Hal sat in his armchair and read the words out loud, he steps into the garage, and the world steps forward. He blinked back tears, both for what had been and what was still unfolding. Emails began stacking in his inbox, from a school district asking about a weekend workshop, from a former engineer offering to help remotely, from a woman who said watching Hal's story saved her marriage because she remembered who she used to be. Relevance became reality. He filmed a video response, without scripts, without polish. Just Hal. Yesterday, the world heard my story. Today, I want to hear yours. What's one thing that made you think, maybe I'm not done yet? He posted. Responses poured in, my knees hurt, but my hands still remember how to build. I've set aside my canvas for years. I'll dust it off tomorrow. I'm 67. I'm starting again. Hal read each one, and each one became an ember under a flame. A producer from a late-night show reached out, we'd love to bring you on. Hal nearly hung up. But then he heard Elon's words echo in his mind, when something is important enough, you do it, even if the odds are not in your favor. And this, Hal's story, was important enough. On stage, under bright studio lights, Hal held the microphone like a lifeline and said quietly, I'm not a celebrity. I'm just a person who remembered that age is not an exit. It's a vantage point. The audience responded with applause. Tonight, he wasn't invisible. He was visible. Necessary. The following morning, Hal's grandson Evan sprinted into the garage. Grandpa. You were on TV. Hal laughed and ruffled his hair, guess I was. They worked together that day, tweaking code, adjusting sensor angles. The projector screen above the bench played clips from the show. For the first time, they built side by side in full sunlight, sharing technique and hope in the same breath. The ripple spread. An NPR segment aired, Guidelight's Garage, where age meets innovation. The voiceover said, here's a man who took failure, dusted it off, and built something that moved more than metal. It moved a nation. Hal listened, elusive pride warming him. He walked by a local university campus that afternoon to drop off crafting kits for their senior program. He passed a group of students dancing in the quad, phones out, probably live streaming something epic. Hal thought of them and thought of his own slow flame rising again after years of dust. Maybe that's how stories travel, when they cross boundaries unexpected. At night, the garage was quiet once more. Hal lit a single lamp above the workstation. He opened his laptop and wrote, Lesson, going national isn't about fireworks. It's about forging a bridge between the past you and the future you. He hit save, then posted behind-the-scenes footage of the TV segment, including Evan's face lighting up during the filming. The comments overflowed with, "We're doing it right alongside you." He glanced at the stack of incoming requests, interviews, invitations, workshop offers, but he paused. His priority wasn't more stages. It was sustaining what he'd started. He decided his next move: build a simple online hub, guide-like community, where stories like his, and opportunities for workshops, mentorships, and kits could live. He drafted the landing page, not too late. Just right now. The glow of creation warmed his chest. Weeks later, he got a message from a town in Vermont. A group of retired machinists and librarians were building their own prototype using Hal's plans. Their video came with shaky hands, wise smiles, and the caption, "Grandpa says we're not done yet." Hal clicked play. Their car wobbled and turned. It wasn't sleek, but it moved. And that was everything. He closed the laptop and leaned back. The garage, his home, his lab, his legacy, felt alive. Not because it held electronics or cameras, but because it held possibility. Age hadn't rewritten his story. He did. And now others were, too. The world had indeed gone national around Hal. But he had learned something deeper: national change begins with one small movement. And that movement almost always begins in the quiet spaces of our own homes. Hal was cleaning up the garage one late afternoon, pulling the soldering iron from its stand, when his phone buzzed with a notification that made him freeze. It said, "You have a new voice message." No caller name, just an anonymous voicemail icon blinking. He tapped it. A voice he recognized instantly filled the room, not through speakers or echo, but through the silence itself, calm, deliberate, unmistakably Elon's. "Hal, I saw what you're doing, sparking inventors when most people say it's too late. Keep going." Elon, the message ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving Hal alone with the hum of the garage and the pounding in his chest. He stood, breath shallow. His hand shook. Elon Musk, of all people, had recorded him a message. Not a public tweet. Not a press statement. A private nod. Permission. That moment cut through years of self-doubt, crackled in his veins like electricity. He played it again. And again. Just to make sure it wasn't a trick. But the voice was warm, steady, even personal. Real. A spark turned into a fire. He collapsed into the stool, tears blurring the tool-laden tabletop. After so many nights of silence, he finally had permission not only to matter, but to move. He let the voice echo over and over, "Keep going." He whispered back into the empty air, "I will." The next morning, the garage felt different, not just brighter. Purpose poured across the walls as he turned on the soldering station, fired up the prototype, and ran the car through its course. With every loop, he felt Elon's quiet confidence pulsing through the circuits. He filmed a new video, the first words coming out as a whisper, "Elon sent me this." He didn't say what. Just that someone had reached back. His channel exploded with curiosity and wonder. Did the real Elon Musk really say that to him? Comments flooded. "If Elon says to keep going, I'm sure you're doing something right." "I heard it too, Dad." "We know it." But even as the world buzzed, Hal grounded himself in the moment. He responded to Rachel, "Elon heard us. He really heard us." It felt silly, like sharing the secret of a lightning bolt. She replied, "Of course he did. You made it impossible not to." The community center class gathered that week, and he told them. "I got a message," he said, voice thick in the fluorescence of the room. "From Elon Musk himself. He said, keep going. That's all." The group stared. Then they applauded. Mary wiped a tear. George nodded like he'd been waiting. Larry whispered, "He's on our side." That weekend, Hal compiled a deck of all the stories from Guide Like Garage, the letter from Jonah, the letters from students and seniors, the videos of people building again, and that tiny voice clip. He emailed it to a friend who ran a national public TV show. "This isn't about me," he wrote. "It's about what can happen when a spark gets recognized." A week later, the producer called, "We want to do a segment. Not on Elon. On you. On this movement." Hal agreed. They filmed in the garage. The camera captured the soldering iron, the blueprints, the taped note on the wall, now smudged and faded. When something is important enough, Hal looked into the lens, his voice even. Elon's message wasn't about fame. It was about seeing potential in someone who thought it was too late. That message, "Keep going," is the best kind of legacy. When the episode aired, viewers erupted. People said they'd paused midlife. Twice widowed men started writing code again. Retirees tried 3D printing. Students said they wrote to their grandparents, saying, "Let's build a robot like Hal did." Comments on the episode page included, "Elon heard you. That's hope. It's okay to be seen. We, all of us, got permission today." Hal watched alone in the garage, tears still wet. He looked around at the tools, the dust, the prototypes. The place didn't feel old anymore. It felt alive. He opened the voicemail one more time, hearing Elon's calm voice. And then he spoke back into the cavernous quiet. "We're just getting started." Hal was meticulously cleaning his workbench late in the afternoon, the garage quiet except for the soft hum of equipment charging and a distant bird call outside. He grabbed the soldering iron, intending merely to stow it away, when a notification pinged on his phone. "You have a new voice message." The screen showed no name, just the enigmatic icon of an unheard message. Curious, he pressed play. The first word crackled through, and he froze. Calm, deliberate, unmistakably Elon's voice. "Hal, your work matters. Keep going." The message then ended, leaving an echo that filled the entire garage and reverberated in his chest. Hal's hand trembled as he stared at the phone. Elon Musk, him, had recorded a personal message. He replayed it, eyes widening, disbelief pulsing. It wasn't a public tweet or a promotional clip, it was intimate, singular, intentional. "Keep going," the simplest phrase, yet it cracked open years of self-doubt. He collapsed onto the stool, tears streaming freely. That tiny message, virtually weightless, felt as though a star had grounded itself in his chest. "I will," he whispered into the dust-laden silence. Next morning, the garage felt different. Lighter. Brighter. He powered up the prototype and watched it wheeled forward, sensors engaging, course followed. Each turn felt gentler, as if buoyed by unheard encouragement. He recorded a new video, short, unedited, with halting voice. "Elon sent me a message. He said, 'Keep going.'" That meant something. Within hours, his channel lit up with comments that glowed like embers. "If Elon told you to keep going, we all are. He heard you. And it's enough. This is the push I needed to try again." But Hal didn't let the hype pull him away. He simply texted Rachel, "He heard us." "Really?" She replied almost immediately, "Of course he did. How could he not?" That felt like permission layered into permission. The following class day at the community center, Hal shared the message. The room hushed. Mary blinked back tears. George nodded as if confirming a private truth. Larry whispered, "He's rooting for us." That afternoon, Hal compiled a defining deck, a collection of letters, videos, prototypes, and now Elon's voicemail, and sent it to a national public TV producer. His note read, "Not about me. About what happens when a spark gets recognized." A week later, he was invited onto the show. On set, Hal stood beneath warm lights and spoke softly. Elon's message wasn't about fame. It was about seeing potential in someone who thought it was too late. The camera caught the soldering iron, the faded note taped above the bench. "When something is important enough, but later Elon's voicemail began to play, quickly, gently, articulating a validation Hal had feared would never come. That broadcast sparked another wave of messages, from widowers learning code again, retirees building old inventions, families spanning generations rebuilding. Viewers said, "We heard his voice and felt seen." Hal watched, tears trickling, knowing the garage was alive, not because it held tools, but because it held possibility. He replayed the voicemail once more, closing his eyes. Then he spoke into the emptiness of the garage, "We're just getting started." And in that quiet, the echo of Elon's voice became a shared heartbeat, propelling more than machinery, but dreams, reconnection, purpose restored. The first time Hal considered turning Guidelight into a living entity, he did so with trembling hands and a breath full of possibility. At 72, he'd never started a business. He'd built prototypes, led a community class, filmed videos, but the word company felt too clean, too corporate for something born of dust, mistakes, late-night flickers of purpose. Yet when Rachel suggested creating a formal venture, something we can sustain, she'd said, he felt something shift deep inside. The garage felt bigger suddenly, as if it were expanding around an idea. He began drafting a simple name on a scrap of graph paper, Last Lap Technologies. Because it wasn't his final act, it was his best one yet. He grabbed his mug of coffee, stared at the letters, and felt their weight settle, Last Lap. As in, the last chance becoming the first leg of something brand new. Naming wasn't all. He sat with Rachel over a video call, tethers of wires and webcams between them. She sketched logos. He shared the idea of making smart mobility tools specifically designed for seniors, easy-to-use retrofit kits for existing vehicles that learned with time. Shared consensus, when something is important enough, you build it, regardless of odds. Hal pulled blueprints, user mockups, community center notes. He cataloged what they had. A growing audience, proof of concept, passion, stories, and momentum. He also recognized what they lacked: funding, technical polish, brand presence. But he also knew this: you build a bridge while walking on it. So they drafted a mission statement: reignite curiosity. Empower movement. Build inclusion, one retrofit at a time. It felt right. Within a week, they incorporated. Paperwork hadn't felt this important since Hal registered for the Electronics Club decades ago. A modest LLC. Nothing fancy. But official. He printed the document and pinned it to the garage wall with a blue tack next to the Elon quote: "When something is important enough, you do it, even if the odds are not in your favor." Cash was tight. Hal dug into his pension savings. Rachel contributed from a small design fund. They applied for a local business grant aimed at intergenerational innovation. While waiting, Hal continued refining the prototype: smoother code, simpler assembly, clearer instructions. He filmed tutorial videos, unboxing the Guidelight kit. Soldering 101, senior safe. His voice was calm, patient, alive. Then came the acceptance email. "Congratulations, your grant is approved." The award listed enough to fund a small run of kits, website hosting, logistics. Hal stared at those words long enough to taste them. He crawled back to the garage, found the blueprints. Folded them with care. Whispered, "We're building." They ordered components in bulk. Shared workspace, an expansion of the garage with a fold-out table. The first 6 kits were assembled with shaky hands but steady hearts: breadboard, Raspberry Pi, sensor array, mount, clear guides. Each kit came with a handwritten note. For the next spark. Hal. Hal's living room became packaging central. He wrapped each kit, slipped in instructions, and mailed them with a hope that felt bigger than any rocket launch. He updated the website, a simple homepage, brand logo, and 2 testimonials, from Jonah, the robotics instructor, and Mary, the seamstress who found her spark again. Then it happened. Orders. Not many. But real. A man from Wisconsin bought a kit. A retired teacher in North Carolina requested one. A granddaughter in California wanted one for her grandfather. Hal cried over each. Not sad, just seeing purpose in motion. Once, a woman named Gloria called on the line Rachel set up. I installed it yesterday with the help of my neighbor, she said, voice cracking. It worked. The car, our old sedan, saw the sidewalk. Stopped. I drove again. I felt alive. Hal placed his hand over the phone, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Me too." Grant follow-up arrived. They qualified for a mid-stage accelerator program focused on assistive technologies. Hal and Rachel virtually pitched, why seniors need mobility, safety, inspiration, why age is not retirement, but reinvention. Weeks later, they got in. Mentorship. Network. Exposure. Last Lap Technologies was no longer a garage dream, it was a seed ready for proof of concept. Mentors debated design options, price models, production logistics. Hal learned new language, MVP, pitch deck, burn rate. At night, he struggled to keep up multiple tabs and jargon. He still had back pain, still needed rest. He reminded himself, this mattered. Even if odds weren't in his favor, he'd done more than start, he'd inspired. He invited the class for beta testing. Seniors, wide-eyed, unboxed prototypes. They followed instructions, tested builds, they'd soldered before, remembered the torque and glow. Children watched. Camera rolled. Guide light kits lit until darkness outside. The video, beta test, mobility infused with belonging. Comments like, "You're redefining age. My mother built this with me. This is legacy." Orders climbed. Rachel designed a simplified DIY manual. Hal wrote a thank you letter that went in each kit. The website became community hub. Forum posts about modifying kits, sharing installation tips, cheering each other on. I did it. Couldn't solder straight line, but I built movement. Months passed. Last Lap Technologies, half in a small garage, half in hearts across the country, had presence. Not a Silicon Valley unicorn. Something better, a message. That it isn't about unicorns, but real people reconnecting to purpose. One crisp morning, Hal sat in the driver's seat of his station wagon, driving the prototype-mounted car around the block, course taped on pavement. Kids waved. Neighbors watched curiously. The car hummed. He exhaled. The odds hadn't magically shifted. But he had. And so had the people around him. He parked. Walked back to the garage. Stood under the quote taped above, "When something is important enough," and then at the plaque on the wall beside it, "Last Lap Technologies, 100% started by purpose." He felt warmth, unbroken. Not because he conquered aging. But because he'd rediscovered agency. And now, others could too. The morning light in the garage felt charged, as if the very air hummed with possibility. Hal stood at his workbench, fingers tracing the latest version of the prototype he and Rachel had been refining. He could still hear Elon's voice, "Keep going," echoing in his mind. It wasn't just about building the car anymore. It was about building something that cut through the world's expectations, through silence, through the hum of "too late." They'd named their venture Last Lap Technologies, sent out kits, started a community, but now they needed to be heard beyond aging circles, beyond stories on local news or niche blogs. They needed to break through the noise. Hal took a slow breath and prepared the next move. It started with a simple live stream. Hal set up the camera in the garage, no slick production, no theatrics, just quiet hum of soldering irons and a steady tripod. He began to speak. "Today, I'm rebuilding the lane detection sequence from scratch. Because failure is the scaffold of innovation." He tapped the quote taped above the bench, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. His voice caught, but he pressed on. We've learned that together, we matter when we move, not when we're perfect, but when we try. The comments streamed in fast. We're watching from Arkansas. I'm 68 and coding again. My father's hands shook, but he's building tonight because he saw you. Thank you for giving us permission to matter. Hal didn't know half of the usernames, but the names, Grandpa Joe, Mama J, Victor, Hannah, felt alive, present, real. A week later, a mid-size national network reached out. We want to feature you and your community. Hal caught his breath. A larger spotlight. One that would shine across age, across expectations, across complacency. He said yes, hands trembling. Rachel hugged him. This is how we climb over the walls of noise, she said. Their garage became a set for a semi-professional shoot. Hal installed an updated lane detection demo. Visitors wore headphones, leaning close as the cam tracked the car's third iteration over the taped course. It moved smoother, faster, smarter. The interviewer, a kind-faced woman, asked softly, "What would you say this is about?" Hal's answer came, plain and measured, not technology. Connection. Time isn't expired until we stop trying. When the segment aired, it was titled, Driven After a Lifetime of Waiting. And it wasn't just Hal that resonated. The shutdowns and monotony of aging, of feeling paused, they shattered. Viewers responded with flooded messages. Churches turned their fellowship halls into tech labs. Senior groups turned Tuesdays into build sessions. A daughter in Ohio wrote, "My dad built a drone with me last night, for a YouTube recipe channel." The world wasn't just hearing. It was responding. Then the coolest message arrived. A startup micro-scholarship fund offered to sponsor 10 kits for isolated rural seniors. A school for at-risk teens asked to co-produce live workshops so generations could build together. The noise around was shifting. Instead of dismissive, too old, static, there were bridges being built through curiosity, through inclusive innovation. Yet breaking through the noise wasn't just about buzz. It meant more responsibility. Hal and Rachel spent nights writing clearer instructions, adding safety notes, simplifying code steps. He remembered Elon's persistence, his honesty about failing. SpaceX almost folded after 3 rocket failures, before the 4th succeeded. Hal's prototype was nothing compared to rockets, but failure was still failure, and learning from it was still legacy. One afternoon, the retired school principal, Clara, 66, whose hands once graded essays, came up to him at a local event. Her gray curls glinted in the sun. She said, "I was scared of that camera. I thought I'd look foolish. But your kits changed that. I built a functioning sensor. And I felt like myself again." Hal knelt beside her. "You are. And so are we, just building again." She nodded, eyes bright, and squeezed his hand. That night, he updated their site, a gallery of build pictures, parents and kids, seniors tandem soldering, glowing LEDs in living rooms. Footer quote bolded, "It's never too late to make movement, yours or someone else's." Days later, national press approached Last Lap. "Could you expand kits to include audio sensors? Voice prompts?" Hal and Rachel worked with Clara's class to co-design accessibility add-ons. The next live stream featured Clara's voice guiding users through assembly. That morning, Hal watched the chat in awe. "That voice is lovely. Clara is our hero. Age gives wisdom that code can't teach." He pressed on. Breaking through noise doesn't end. It expands. It echoes. Every kit shipping felt like a message. Purpose travels, sometimes slowly, one solder joint at a time. In the quiet garage later, after all the weight of attention and expansion, Hal stood under the taped quote again. He looked at his hands, lined, steady, stained with solder, and whispered, "We did break through." The noise wasn't gone, but now it carried stories of reconnection, of late bloomers, of movement renewed. And in that resonance, Hal found his legacy unfolding, circuit by circuit, heart by heart. Hal stepped out of his garage into the early morning light, the air crisp and weighted with possibility. The street was quiet, just the distant hum of a lawnmower waking up the neighborhood. He looked at his hands, scarred, steady, warm with the residue of circuit solder and soft with age, and whispered, "All right, road." Relevance. It had felt like an elusive concept, something that belonged to younger people, social media luminaries, constant innovators. But Hal realized something simple: relevance isn't about novelty. It's about presence. It's about showing up. It's about refusing to fade into the background. And he had a road to walk to prove it. He climbed into his station wagon, carrying 2 prototype kits. One for a local senior center, another for a teen makers after-school program across town. As the engine rumbled to life, he thought about Elon's philosophy: failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. That sense of permission had opened everything. He arrived at the senior center with a handful of kits and curiosity. Inside was a room full of men and women whose lives had once revolved around responsibility and routine. Hal set the kits on the table and watched them circle like moths to a flame. "We're building sensors that help a vehicle detect obstacles," he explained, voice steady. "And that movement, it's not just about cars. It's about proving we still have things to teach the world." The group nodded, skeptical, then intrigued. By the end of the session, one of them, Marion, 74, had assembled her sensor snugly. "I'd never touched soldering until today," she said. "Now I can't stop." Next, Hal drove to the after-school program for teens. Kids hovered over his garage-born prototype, their energy palpable. He handed them kits and they sprang to life, fast fingers, bright questions, laughter. "How do you debug?" one asked. "You keep trying until it runs," Hal answered. Relevance passes on, he thought, observing the sparks in their eyes. Later, as Hal drove back, the road felt different, not empty, but threaded with all these lives moving forward. Relevance isn't a trophy, it's motion. Back at the garage, he pulled up the live stream comments from that morning's sessions. "My mom wants to sign up for soldering class. My grandson hates school, but he's asking how this thing works. I thought I was invisible. Now I feel seen." Hal's chest tightened. Each message felt like an echo back toward him, confirmation that presence ripples outward. That evening, he met with Rachel over video. They sketched plans for remote workshops. Grandpa teaches, they follow along. Weekly sessions that cross a generation gap in real time. "You keep us relevant, Dad," Rachel said softly, screen glow lighting her face. He swallowed. "Maybe relevance is relational," he said. A week later, they launched the first workshop. Hal in the garage, live streaming, older hands guiding younger, and younger hands marveling at older wisdom. Comments poured in: "My grandma's soldering beside me. I can't work the camera, but I can wire a sensor. This is worth more than gold." Relevance had legs again. Months passed. Hal found himself invited to speak at a regional Innovation Over 60 conference. He was nervous, but he climbed onto that stage beside people he never thought would include him, and said, "Relevance isn't about being ahead of the curve. It's about embracing who you are, exactly where you are, choosing to matter every day. Whether you're coding your first script at 72 or teaching your nephew to solder at 10, you're here. You're alive. That's relevance." The applause made him feel timeless. Back in the garage that night, everything felt softer: the glow of the lamp, the hum of the soldering iron, the quiet hum of purpose. He looked at his kits, his notes, the notes from participants, and thought, this is it. He pulled out his phone and typed, "Today's lesson: relevance is choosing to matter, every day." "Where are you showing up?" Replies came: "In the garden. In the kitchen, teaching recipes. In the bedroom, learning guitar again. Right where I am." And Hal smiled, real and quiet. He walked to the window and looked down the block. Birds settled on wires. Leaves rustled. The road stretched. And he wasn't chasing relevance. He was living into it. The garage was still, the soft creak of the old door the only sound at dawn. Hal stood inside, a cup of black coffee warming his hands, watching the familiar space as if for the first time. For years, it had been a tomb of half-finished projects and dust, a place where dreams went quiet. But now, it was alive. The walls hummed with energy, strings of LED lights twinkled along shelves, posters of Elon Musk quotes hung with fresh pride, and scattered tools glistened in the early light like trophies of a new purpose. This was no longer a mere garage, it was a workshop, a community hub, a cradle for possibility. Hal's fingers brushed over the workbench, polished from hours of use, and memories spilled in. He remembered late nights alone, the ache of invisibility, the weight of time's passage. But those were shadows now, replaced by light cast from hope and action. The garage had become a symbol, not just of innovation, but of rebirth. Rachel was already there when he arrived, unpacking boxes of new kits. She smiled, eyes bright with plans and possibilities. "We got the grant approval for expansion," she said, voice bubbling with excitement. "This means more kits, better tools, and maybe even a part-time instructor." Hal's chest tightened with gratitude. The seed they planted had rooted deep. Together, they mapped out a new vision: weekly build nights open to anyone over 60, drop-in classes for curious neighbors, virtual sessions connecting seniors from rural towns. The garage would pulse with life again, not just Hal's dreams but the dreams of many. They drafted flyers with Rachel's crisp designs and Hal's heartfelt words: rediscover your spark. Build. Connect. Move forward. The first build night came fast. Hal watched as hesitant hands entered the garage. Gray hair, cautious smiles, eyes flickering between hope and doubt. But soon, soldering irons warmed, hands steadied, and laughter filled the space. It was messy, imperfect, but vibrant, a dance of rekindled curiosity and stubborn joy. One woman, Ruth, shared that it was the first time she felt capable in years. Another man, Joe, said he'd forgotten how good it felt to learn something new. The garage echoed with stories, regrets confessed, hopes rekindled, friendships forged over resistors and code snippets. Hal listened, heart wide, realizing this space was more than metal and wires. It was sanctuary. Over weeks, the garage transformed further. Walls adorned with photos from build nights, testimonials pinned beside tools. A small library grew, books on electronics, memoirs, guides, all donated by community members. Hal created a whiteboard filled with goals and dreams: teach 100 seniors to build safe mobility kits. Connect with local schools. Host an intergenerational hackathon. The garage breathed ambition. Evenings were magic. The glow of screens mixed with warm chatter as volunteers, young and old, worked side by side. Rachel taught coding basics, Hal guided soldering, kids sketched ideas on paper while elders shared life wisdom. It was a tapestry of time, learning, and renewal. One particularly memorable night, Hal stood before a group listening to him share the story of Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of innovation, how SpaceX failed repeatedly before launching a successful rocket, how Tesla's early days were riddled with doubt. The lesson, Hal said, voice steady and warm, isn't to avoid failure but to keep showing up despite it. Because when you do, you become unstoppable. Faces lit with understanding. A few wiped tears. That night, as the last volunteer left, Hal lingered, running his hands along the bench. The garage wasn't just his now, it belonged to every soul rediscovering purpose within these walls. It was reborn, not as a relic of the past, but as a beacon for the future. Months later, the garage hosted its first public event: Solder, Share, Spark, a celebration of intergenerational innovation. Local press came, intrigued by this unlikely tech hub born in a quiet suburb. Children showed parents how to build simple sensors, seniors shared stories of how the kits had changed their sense of possibility. The mayor stopped by, calling it a testament to the power of perseverance. Hal stood beside Rachel, watching the crowd buzz with energy. He thought of the lonely mornings, the doubts, the quiet despair, and how far they'd come. The garage was no longer a forgotten corner of his home. It was a crucible of transformation, proof that it was never too late to start again. That night, Hal wrote in his journal, "Today, the garage breathed life into dreams. Not mine alone, but ours. Rebirth isn't magic, it's work, courage, and community." He folded the page, smiled, and switched off the light. The sun dipped low over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across the street as Hal sat on his porch, the evening air cool but comforting. The garage door stood slightly ajar behind him, a quiet invitation to the space that had transformed not just his life, but the lives of so many others. Around him, the world hummed softly with the rhythms of ordinary life, children's laughter drifting from a neighbor's yard, a dog barking in the distance, the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. Yet in this calm, Hal felt the pulse of something much bigger, a legacy reborn, a story rewritten. For decades, he had believed that aging was a slow fading into silence, a gradual withdrawal from relevance, from innovation, from purpose. That belief had settled like dust on his soul, dimming his spirit and isolating him in a quiet house filled with memories of what might have been. But then came the spark lit by Elon Musk's fearless pursuit of the impossible, his refusal to accept limits, his embodiment of relentless forward motion. That spark had ignited a flame inside Hal, a flame that refused to die out, no matter how many years had passed or how many doors had closed. He thought back to the early days, sitting alone in that dim garage, the weight of regret heavy on his shoulders, watching Elon's interviews and hearing those words, "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster." Teslarthy.com, words that felt like permission, a permission to start again, to build, to connect, to matter. And matter he did. The journey hadn't been easy. There were moments when the noise of doubt threatened to drown him, the skeptical glances from his children who worried he was chasing a fading dream, the days when his hands trembled and his eyes tired, when progress felt painfully slow. But through it all, Hal held fast to the belief that purpose wasn't reserved for the young, that innovation was not a fleeting youth's game, but a lifelong pursuit. Now, as he looked out over the street, Hal saw the fruits of that belief in the faces of those who gathered regularly in his garage, the seniors learning to solder, the teens eager to ask questions, the families bridging generations through shared projects. He saw it in the emails from strangers who had found new meaning through last lap technologies, in the small donations that kept the kits coming, in the local schools that had invited them to speak and teach. His phone buzzed softly. A message from Rachel popped up. "We've just reached 200 kits shipped this month. Our community is growing every day." Hal smiled, heart swelling. 200 lives touched, 200 stories rewritten. And still, this was just the beginning. He thought about Elon once more, how the entrepreneur had redefined industries, challenged skeptics, and dared to dream on a scale few could imagine. But Elon's true legacy, Hal realized, wasn't just the rockets or the cars, it was the spirit of defiance against limits, the courage to rebuild and reinvent at any stage of life. That was the lesson Hal carried forward, and shared with everyone who walked through his garage door. The porch light flicked on, casting a warm glow that mingled with the twilight. Hal rose slowly, his joints creaking but his spirit light. He walked inside, past the open garage where tools gleamed softly under the fluorescent lights. The walls, once bare and forgotten, were now adorned with photos, smiling faces from workshops, snapshots of build nights, candid moments of triumph and laughter. A whiteboard stood proudly, filled with upcoming project ideas and goals: host first intergenerational hackathon. Develop advanced voice control kit. Partner with local veterans center. Each note a testament to a vision that refused to settle for anything less than impact. Hal settled at his workbench and opened his laptop, the screen casting a gentle light over his lined face. He began typing a message for the community newsletter, a letter from the heart. "Dear friends," he wrote, "I used to believe my time had passed, that the world had moved on without me. But through our shared journey, I have learned that it's never too late to begin again. Every circuit we solder, every line of code we write, is a statement: we matter. We create. We inspire. This legacy is ours to build, together." He paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard, then added, "Thank you for being part of this movement. The road ahead is bright, and I am honored to walk it with you." He hit send, a quiet but powerful moment of connection. Later, as the house settled into nighttime stillness, Hal stepped outside once more. The stars were just beginning to prick the dark canvas of the sky, distant and steady. He thought about the road that had brought him here, not a straight line, but a winding path marked by challenges and breakthroughs, failures and victories. A path that mirrored the very essence of innovation itself. Elon's voice echoed again in his mind, a final reminder and encouragement. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. For developers.com, Hal smiled softly. This was important. More than important, it was necessary. He breathed in the cool night air, feeling the steady beat of his own heart, the quiet strength of years lived fully and freely. The legacy he had thought lost was alive and growing, fueled by every hand that reached out to build, every mind that dared to dream, every soul that refused to be silenced by age or fear. Hal turned back to the porch light, the warm glow like a beacon in the dark, and whispered to himself, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." And with that, he knew the story was far from over. It was only just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?